Okay, so what if I told you the Gospels aren't just stories about faith? What if they actually contain, well, the fingerprint of their divine author baked right into the text? In this explainer, we're going to dig into a really powerful idea that the sheer strategic genius of Jesus is, in itself, the ultimate proof of the gospel. All right, but first, we've got to clear the air about something. There are really two ways of looking at God being presented here. On one side, you've got this idea of a, let's call it a low-effort God. You know the type, kind of like a cosmic cartoon. Doesn't ask for much, just some vague belief, very therapeutic. But the source material we're looking at pushes for a high-effort God. This is an author who doesn't just watch from the sidelines. No, this author writes himself into the play, and that requires us to actually seek him out. And that brings us right to the heart of it all, this idea of the author in the play. The whole argument really is that the gospel proves itself, not through blind faith, but through the sheer, undeniable genius of its main character. This quote really frames the whole discussion. See, we're not talking about feelings or emotional appeals here. We're talking about straight-up intellectual evidence. The claim is that the jurisdictional genius of Jesus acts like a divine fingerprint left all over the pages of Scripture. I mean, that's a pretty bold claim, right? So let's unpack exactly what that means. Okay, so the very first thing we have to do is toss out that popular image of Jesus. You know, the soft, gentle teacher of nice sayings. The Jesus we find in the source material, he's not just about platitudes. He's a hyper-strategist, locked in what you could only call jurisdictional warfare. So what does that big phrase, the author in the play, really mean? Well, think of it this way. It's basically the incarnation, but seen through a new lens. The idea is that God didn't just stay off stage pulling the strings. Nope, he wrote himself into the story as the main character, Jesus. And that's presented as the ultimate act of high-effort love. All right, so to really get a grip on Jesus' strategy, you have to understand the battlefield he walked into. And according to this worldview, the world is absolutely a contested territory. And right at the heart of this contested world is a concept called the divine council. Now, what is that? It refers to a council of spiritual beings. The Bible calls them sons of God, who were given authority over all the nations, but they rebelled. And this isn't presented as some kind of metaphor. It's seen as the foundational bedrock reality of the spiritual world. And this idea, it's pulled straight from the Bible. You look at Psalm 82, for instance. It's not talking about human kings or judges. It literally describes God holding judgment in the midst of the gods. And gods here means these rebellious spiritual beings who were supposed to govern the nations justly, but, well, they totally failed. Now this has just massive implications. Citing passages like Deuteronomy 32, the source material argues that our world is a jurisdictional battlefield. The nations are legally, not just figuratively, but legally under the authority of these fallen spiritual beings and have been ever since the Tower of Babel. So with that in mind, when Jesus finally shows up on the scene, his entire mission gets reframed. It's not just a teaching tour, it's a jurisdictional invasion. He's there to reclaim territory. Every single miracle, every exorcism, you have to see it as an act of war against these occupying powers. Okay, so that brings us to the core piece of evidence. If that whole worldview is the why behind Jesus' mission, then what we're about to look at, the jurisdictional trap, is the how. It's the proof of a divine intellect at work. So let's jump into a classic example from Matthew chapter 22. You have Jesus' opponents, we're talking the sharpest legal and religious minds of the day, and they think they finally have him cornered. They lay this perfect trap with what seems like a simple question about paying taxes to Rome. Let's just break down the genius of what happens next. Their question is a perfect dilemma. It's a lose-lose. If he says, yes, pay the tax, he's a traitor to his own people. If he says, no, don't pay it, he's a rebel against Rome. See, trapped. But Jesus just flips the whole thing on its head. He sets a counter trap. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Boom. He doesn't just sidestep their trap. He completely obliterates it by asserting a higher jurisdiction, God's over everything. And this is the whole point right here. The argument is that this level of strategic genius, this ability to outwit the smartest people in the room on their own turf in real time, it's just impossible to fabricate. You know, a bunch of uneducated fishermen couldn't have just made up a character this brilliant. This is presented as direct, hard evidence of a divine author. Okay, so what does all this actually mean for you and me? That brings us to our final section, the high-effort pursuit. Because a genius like this, well, it demands something from us if we really want to understand it. And the logic here is pretty simple when you think about it. A story this complex, this layered, written by an author this intelligent, you just can't get it with a casual, low-effort approach. It's impossible. It demands that we actually engage with it, that we study it, that we wrestle with the text. And you know what? This idea is backed up right there in Scripture. Hebrews 11 says that God, He is a rewarder of those who seek Him. The key word there is seek. The emphasis is all on the action, the high-effort pursuit. And what's the reward? It's revelation. It's understanding the incredible story that the author has written. All right, so to bring this all home, let's just recap the key takeaways here. First, the Gospels aren't just faith documents. They're presented as evidence of a divine author. Second, Jesus isn't just a soft teacher, He's a hyper-strategist. Third, the world He entered is a contested jurisdictional battlefield. And finally, point 4, really understanding this whole story, well, it requires a high-effort pursuit from every single one of us. And that leaves us with one final, and I think, pretty provocative question. Which God are you actually seeking? The simple, low-effort cosmic cartoon, or the high-effort, brilliant author who wrote himself right into the middle of the play?